we can constantly draw these similarities and comparisons in the human to canine realm because we have been in deep partnership, totally enmeshed and embedded in one another's lives for 30,000 years.
Yeah. You mean humans and the dogs?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So looking at, as you described this RFK as being your idea of the embodiment of an alpha, right? It's really because of that essence and the energy. And that's what keeps everything safe, workable, fluid, and successful, right?
Yeah.
Those are the characteristics of the true leader.
This is Spirit Gym. Today, our host Paul Chek is speaking with dog shaman and world-renowned canine behaviorist Sasha Armstrong. Thank you for listening to this podcast, which would not be possible without you, our subscribers, and also our premier sponsors, Bioptimizers, Paleo Valley, Wild Pastures, and Organifi. The sponsors' special offers and discounts are mentioned in this episode, or you can visit the show notes page at paulchek.com/podcast. Today, Paul and Sasha are talking about Peaceful Dog Mastery, which is also the title of her newest book.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Spirit Gym with Paul Chek. Today, we're going to talk about Peaceful Dog Mastery with Sasha Armstrong, who is back for our second podcast together. Her previous podcast was very well received. I got a lot of great feedback on it. So if you haven't listened to it, feel free to go back. Today, we're going to talk about Sasha's brand new book, Peaceful Dog Mastery, A Conscious Path to Understanding Your Dog's Nature and Nurturing an Unbreakable Bond through Mindful Leadership and Non-Attachment. And the cover of the book is absolutely beautiful. In fact, this morning, my son came for his morning visit with Papa, and he saw it on my desk, and he goes, "Dad, what's that book? I love that book cover." And I told him about what the book was, and he said, "Oh, can Penny read that to me? I want a better bond with my dogs." So that's how we got started. So Sasha, welcome back.
Thank you, Paul. It's such a treasure to be back with you.
Cool.
Again.
Yeah. Welcome back to the Rainbow.
Yeah.
We covered a lot last time. It was a very interesting podcast. We got into a lot about alpha male and alpha female relationships and just your whole concept of how to, relate to dogs, understand dogs and our history and evolution with dogs, which I thought was fascinating. And I think there's more of that coming today from the outline that we worked on together. To start off, it appears that that there are relationship interconnections and similarities between the mission and movement of Spirit Gym and Peaceful Dog Mastery Embodied Alpha Leader Masterclass, which is your class, right?
Yes.
Well, it was interesting for me to see that. So I just love to hear your thoughts about that.
Well, yeah, as soon as I was exposed to the mission and the message of Spirit Gym, it was just so nourishing and exciting for me, because just knowing that we are in a call to action right now.
Totally.
And the time is now to be discovering and exploring and going deep into reconnecting with ourselves and to nature and to the God within. And as my focus is doing that by way of our dogs and animals and nature, of course, that is very similar to what is taught in Spirit Gym, and the concepts that are that you're really inspiring people to explore. And so it just felt so exhilarating and exciting for me to be able to come together at this time and share our sacred work, our sacred works.
Yeah, I think it's important. One of the things about true spiritual development, there's one camp which we would say is the more religious camp, where you go to church on Sunday, or if you're Seventh-day Adventist, Saturday, or you go to a temple and someone talks to you, and you have a sermon or a lecture or whatever. But then you go off and live your life, and I haven't really seen evidence that that's really growing us consciously. In my whole career, over 40 years, I've been working with people with every problem you can imagine, and the grand majority of them claim religious affiliation, or I'm a Christian, or I'm a Muslim, or I'm a member of the Jewish faith, or whatever their background is. But I look at the problems in people's lives, and I look at all the years they spent going to churches and temples, and it's like there's a disconnect. It's almost as though, when I was a kid in school, and even older in various schools and trainings, people will memorize things, they'll study to pass a test, but then 2 weeks later, they can't remember anything. In other words, it's not embodied learning. But with real spiritual development, everything from the way you eat, to what you eat, to your relationship with the food, to, how you share life with your partner, your children, your animals. I mean, we have 28 animals now, 28 or more, between chickens and pigs and goats and dogs and whatever else. We had rabbits for a while, and we're building it out progressively because it's a lot of work. But, there's a lot of relationships there, and you see how just little things like, we had a potbelly pig, Rudy, and he's older. He was given to us by someone that had to move away, and they searched long and hard for a home that they thought he would do well in. And then we got a second pig named Honey, who was, again, someone else who had to move away and was looking for a home. When Honey, the female, she's 7. She was 7 when she was brought here. When her owner brought her here, it was a very profound experience, because she was with him, kind of like a dog would follow its master. And then she was touring around in the farmyard area, and where all the other animals are. And when he got in his car and drove away, she literally fell on the ground. She knew she was being left behind. And she spent about 3 weeks or so in a very depressed state. She was very aggressive to our other pig, Rudy, who's old, and she was attacking him, and he was often wounded and bleeding, and she would eat his food and push him away. And you could see she was just emotionally distraught and angry. With that, there came a lot of tension between the animals and even the birds, the chickens, and you could really feel that there was a sense of walking on eggshells. But we got these 2 goats, and these goats, within 2 days, totally transformed that entire farmyard, to where everybody was getting along. The chickens started going into the pigs area and hanging out with the pigs. The goats hang out with everybody. It was just the craziest thing. And it reminded me of when they put wolves back in Yellowstone, and how it changed everything, from the flow of the rivers to the plants and trees and the proportions of animals. It was like people really hadn't become aware of how powerful one animal species could be in a place as big as Yellowstone. So when I watched this happen, I thought, wow, this is wild. These goats somehow have a way of balancing and harmonizing this whole environment. What I'm sharing is this animal dynamic, and how we all interact together, and how we work together, and observing these things. That's legitimate spiritual practice, because you see the same tendencies that the animals have, to be emotional, to be territorial, to fight, to hold grudges. That's built right into our limbic system. We have all of that in us. Yet,
Yes.
if we can't get it right inside of us, how can we ever support the animals in getting it right for themselves or each other? The spiritual observation I was making is that, aside from the obvious, is how having 2 goats come into the environment could totally change everything. So anyhow, I just thought I would share that and see if you have any comments in that regard.
So many beautiful points that you make. The harmonization, and this really goes into the idea that we are all part of a collective. We all count on the power of the numbers, power of the community, power of the collective to be successful and survive.
Yes.
And not even just from a survival standpoint, but we can't survive if we're not harmonized.
Yeah.
And we see this with, right, the wolves in Yellowstone. We've seen it with the goats that entered into the collective of, your animals. And it doesn't matter if they're different species, because when you look at goats and pigs and horses and wolves and dogs and humans, we are all pack animals, right? We all exist within the tribe, the herd, the flock, the pride. I mean, this is how we're designed. And so to be the conscious observer, right, to see, to separate ourselves or to think that we're disconnected from that is, quite frankly, a huge part of why I think that we are so dysfunctional as a society, as a species. And tuning into the animals and their teachings, is really the golden ticket as far as I'm concerned.
Yes, I think too, a lot of the things you shared in our previous podcast about the relationship between the owners of animals, whatever you would refer to them technically as, some people would say the master of the dog or whatever. I remember the important thing for me in that conversation is that people were treating and continue to treat their dogs almost like Barbie dolls or objects, or sometimes too extreme to the point of relying on them like you would rely on a spouse
or a therapist.
Yes. So the dog's being taxed with too much responsibility.
Human wounding.
Yes.
The human wounding that's projected and just expected that our dogs have to carry that load.
Yeah, it's real interesting because I was talking about this with Angie, but she was doing biogeometry with a client of hers, and the client said that she's had this issue, I think, of 3 cats in a row getting sick and having trouble. I think 2 of them died, and she's like to Angie, my 3rd one now is starting to show the same symptoms, and the previous 2 had all died from the same thing, which I believe was kidney or spleen or both problems. And so Angie's analyzing this woman's health on biogeometry, and sure enough, she's got kidney and spleen challenges. And so she asks Angie, could you check out my cat? Because I'm concerned. And lo and behold, the cat has the exact same issues that the last 2 cats died from, which are the exact issues which she's got from. And so, the woman said to Angie, I'm paraphrasing Angie, but she goes, do you think it has something to do with me? And Angie said, well, yes, they're absorbing your stress, and it's very important you be aware of that. And I think the woman volunteered, like, well, it sounds like I really need to work on myself. And Angie said, well, yes, that's what we're doing, but at least she recognized it. The next thing we were going to talk about here, you shared the wounded masculine and feminine, each of us, and the misunderstandings of the alpha among both dogs and human beings, the broken and abused terminology of the alpha, particularly pertaining to the alpha male, and damaging misinterpretation and misconception of what the true embodiment of the alpha leader is. And then you talk about going into the wounded masculine and wounded feminine, which I think is such an important topic for humans today. There's a lot of that going on. I mean, I really think that's kind of at the core in many ways of humanity's health problems and psychological problems. And I think, speaking of the wounded alpha, like when I see Donald Trump, I really see a wounded alpha. And that would be if you considered him an alpha. I personally wouldn't, but most people
society would.
Yes.
And that's what we're talking about.
Yeah. I mean, as an ex-elite soldier, I don't see Donald Trump as an alpha. I see him pretending to be an alpha and getting away with it because people don't really know what a real alpha is. But any alpha male that I know would never vote for Donald Trump.
Right.
They would be concerned for everybody.
Yes.
And that's, if you love Donald Trump, hey,
God bless.
Diversity is the
Yes.
way of nature. And
Yes.
so to me, Robert F. Kennedy is a real alpha male. If you look at what's important to him and you look at his values and his sensitivity to the needs of nature and human beings and his track record for protecting life.
What else is it about that embodiment that, let's just say, Trump doesn't have, that RFK does? He is calm.
Yeah.
He is neutral. And I would even say the way that he communicates is non-preferential. So it's like there's this stability where he doesn't have to position himself
Mhm.
as bigger or better
Right.
than anybody else. And he
Yeah.
really he's very grounded and stays in his lane.
Yeah.
And there's not this very flamboyant, inflammatory way in which he conducts himself. So, again, and I love talking about, we can constantly draw these similarities and comparisons in the human to canine realm
Yeah.
because we have been in deep partnership, totally enmeshed and embedded in one another's lives for 30,000 years.
Yeah. You mean humans and the dogs?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So looking at, as you described this RFK as being your idea of the embodiment of an alpha, right? It's really because of that essence and the energy. And that's what keeps everything safe, workable, fluid,
Mhm.
and successful, right?
Yeah.
Those are the characteristics of the true leader.
Hi, everybody. Gluten-containing grains are some of the most problematic foods for anybody to eat. There's entire books like Grain Brain written on what happens when we eat gluten. And a lot of these gluten-containing grains really mess up our digestion, our metabolism. They cause all sorts of skin problems, gas, and bloating. And I have found in my clinical practice, very few people that are gluten intolerant can enjoy gluten-free treats at all without having the same reaction. But Wade Lightheart, co-founder of Bioptimizers, turned me on to his Gluten Guardian product, and I was amazed that I could actually enjoy an occasional brownie or cookie. And if I take a couple Gluten Guardian enzymes, I actually feel fantastic. I don't get swelling, gas, bloating. And it's such a joy to have a little freedom to enjoy a treat, right? When you really live a healthy lifestyle, it can get a little confining with all the limitations we have today with all the food problems. So when you have a product like that opens the door to a little freedom, it's actually quite a gift. So Wade, could you tell us how Gluten Guardian does its magic?
Well, gluten is like the cover of a baseball,
Yeah.
and that cover is this protein coating that we can't unlock the nutrients inside it. And it turns out that researchers at Harvard found that gluten is inflammatory for everyone, even if you can't feel it.
Yes.
However, there is a specific enzyme that will actually break down that protein coating which the gluten molecule contains. It's called DPP4, dipeptidyl peptidase 4. That's a tongue twister. But the bottom line is we have the highest dosage of DP4 that you can get without a prescription, and it is absolute magic. You can enjoy pizza, bread, pasta, cookies, all that. Not that we're recommending that, but of course, when you go to a restaurant, sometimes the food is contaminated, even if you're so, stringent on your diet. And the bottom line is Gluten Guardian serves as a guardian for your health, your diet, and the inflammatory conditions that arise from eating gluten.
So if you say you eat a couple of cookies or a brownie and you take a couple of Gluten Guardian enzymes, but you still feel some symptoms, what's the range for how many of those capsules you can take without giving yourself any kind of trouble? Is there any kind of ceiling on that?
It's going to vary from person to person. Now, I would rate people on a scale of 1 to 10 on how sensitive, and that usually increases as we age. So what we suggest people is start with 1 to 2 capsules and then increase the dosage until you feel no symptoms. And then once you're there, what we found, usually after 3-4 months of that, you can start to use less and less of the Gluten Guardian. It seems to have a systemic effect on the body.
Excellent. So how do people get a hold of this amazing product, Gluten Guardian?
Super simple. Just go to www.bioptimizers.com/living4D. Put in Paul10 for a 10% discount. That's BIOPTIMIZERS.com/living4D. Paul 10 will get you a discount on this and all of our other products.
And while you're there, shop around, because every single one of the products made by Bioptimizers is the highest quality with the most advanced science. I've tested them all. I use them all. I love them, or I wouldn't be sharing them with you here. Thank you, Wade.
Thank you.
What I'd like to hear more about from you, though, is this concept of the broken alpha male, the broken alpha female, how that's playing out not only in families and in culture, but how it's playing out in how we relate to our dogs and what's the impact on them.
It seems as though it's a common occurrence these days that I will hear somebody reach out saying that dogs don't need alphas, or dogs are not, they don't rely on the pack, they don't exist anymore.
That's a strange concept.
It's totally unrealistic and not rooted in anything that is factual.
You know what that reminds me of? That's
What?
about parallel with saying that children can choose their sex and they don't need parents' approval, or that children can get vaccinated without parents' approval. We've got documentaries asking the question, what is a woman? I mean, we're talking about like such a detachment from
Yes.
from any degree of observation and understanding. To me, I'm just saying that's about the correlate I would draw.
100%.
And it just tells me somebody has not spent time at all around anything but maybe their little chihuahua or whatever it is that their dog is, but they haven't really seen dogs interacting together, which I think for a lot of people worldwide, that's the case.
That's the case. And that is where one of the biggest issues lies, is that we're morphing and mutating our dogs into something that somehow serves humanity, but it's coming from a very wounded and dysfunctional place, not acknowledging or understanding their intrinsic nature. So much as, I mean, I see that with children as well,
Yes.
right? You know, to me, saying that dogs don't need alphas is like saying that children don't need parents.
Yeah.
And that archetypal, the alpha male, alpha female roles that are so crucial in order for the collective to be successful and survive. And I understand why a lot of people have an adverse, negative reaction to this idea of, oh my gosh, I have to be the alpha to my dog. I have to be aggressive and dominating and controlling, and I have to enforce my will and show up in such a way that is really a false sense of respect.
Isn't that a bit of a misunderstanding of the alpha, though?
It completely is.
Yeah.
Right. So that's the woundedness that comes in there.
Yeah. It's almost like their perception of the alpha is like a silverback gorilla that's just totally dominating, or a gangster that just moves in and takes over the territory or whatever. But maybe their alpha concept is coming from watching movies and not really reality.
It is, and it's old, it's outdated, and it again is a lot of it is fueled, let's just say, in the dog training industry by a bunch of people that don't understand the true nature, the true essence of the embodied alpha. And because they don't understand the dog, they feel that the only way to get the dog to listen or have a respect for them is to dominate and control and obliterate the spirit. And you see this across the board. It's rampant in the dog training industry.
Mm-hmm. So when you say obliterate the spirit, you mean, it sounds to me like you mean like what happens in prison camps, where the prison guards will just beat somebody into submission, so there's no attempt to try to escape or to be hard to handle.
Right. There's no room for understanding, willing cooperation, clear communication. It's right. It's a wounding that exists within the abuser, right? So the way that the alpha is painted is really an abusive personality. It's abusive tactics, and nobody is being liberated in that situation. Nobody's learning and growing and expanding. They're being shut down and they're being hurt, really.
Yeah, if a dog has to live in that environment, it seems that it wouldn't be very nourishing, because that's kind of how I was raised. My father was like that. Like that's
So was mine.
That's exactly like my dad didn't know the difference between a child and an animal, and he treated them all with force.
Right. And how much healing have you had to do as a result of that?
Well, I spent my whole life healing, and I still have to be very careful, because my first reaction is if I feel like somebody's imposing on me or, acting like my father would act around me, my first reaction is to counterpunch in some way. So I have to constantly watch for my father inside of me. And even with animals, like, my father would just manhandle them And, we had a big farm, 142 acre farm with, 100 to 120 sheep. And so I was always, interacting with all these animals and doing things like castrating animals and shearing sheep and things that can be a bit stressful as a kid, especially to, holding an animal down so it getting balls cut off as the animal's screaming violently. And point being is that the younger you were when you had any programming experience, the more it builds itself as the infrastructure of your whole psychic perception of yourself. But as we grow and get more and more indoctrinated and have more and more life experience, we don't perceive ourselves to be the child anymore that was getting coerced or pushed or belittled or beaten or brainwashed by religion or whatever else it might be. We have a normal sense of ourself, just like you feel yourself sitting here and I feel myself sitting here. But what's happening is all that information's running in our unconscious, and it's actually pre-framing every experience that we have. So for example, if I'm in an environment with aggressive males, immediately the first thing that rises up in me is, okay, I'm in the presence of someone acting like my father, and that can be very dangerous. There's a part of me that gets ready to defend or to, do whatever I've got to do to protect myself or to protect other people. Just to translate that into dog language, if one of our dogs is behaving in a way that might not be ideal, for example, we had a hard time with them for quite a while because they kept getting past the fence. They would find ways over the fence. Then they would go to the neighbors and, bark all night and try to, interact with their dogs. And the neighbors would call us all pissed off and say, come get your dogs, they're driving us crazy, blah, 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 the typical thing. So then I would, not want to do that because it's the end of the day. I'm tired. I've been working all day and I got to go traipsing across 14 acres to a fence and find out where the hole is, or drive around, try to find where the dogs are at. And so my frustration with the dogs is to just whack them, so like, don't do that. And when you're going to learn? But then I have to remember they're dogs and they're wanting to expand their territory and see who's out there, the dog mentality. But the point I'm making is I have to watch, because that's when I feel my father's nature coming up. It's like, okay, I'm going to make sure you never do that again type behavior. But I know that that's not ideal and it can wound the dog. And
it doesn't teach them.
No, and it also leaves them afraid when I'm around.
Right. And think of the energy that you expend that isn't productive, right? So you lose your sense of self because you're coming from a place of your shadow and your wounding.
Yeah.
Right? So you don't get to leave that experience feeling empowered, or that you have made a shift in a positive way. And that really, brings up a whole other, one of my favorite topics, which is the difference between education and training.
Yes, right? I know we have that in there.
Yeah.
That's probably a good topic. But just to interject, I have to constantly watch for that tendency, because I am not a person that likes to be boxed, cornered, pressured. And I learned that from my father. But I must say I had it in me as a soul.
Yes.
Because no matter what, no matter how angry or violent he got or how bad he would beat us, I was ready to go to war with him. Like I was, and I would not stand for him beating my brother, my mother, my sisters, whatever. And I remember times, for example, that he would start abusing somebody physically, and me and my brother would pick up toys and throw them at him. We were just little kids. We were just throwing everything we could at him. And then he would come after us and we'd have to run like hell. But you see, the point is that all that stuff's running itself in the background.
Yes.
So even when I'm working with clients, like sometimes I have to take clients through really tough shit. And it's very normal for them to go through puberty at a certain stage and then start projecting all their daddy stuff onto the therapist. And sometimes it can be quite challenging to work through, because I have to, I'm trying to guide this person, and I have to stay very conscious in myself so that I don't react to them in a way that is more based on my unconscious programming, because then I can feel my father's urge to say, quit being a dumb fuck, for Christ's sakes, wake up, stuff like that, which wouldn't be good coaching. But inside of myself, I'm watching the dragon,
Yes.
And so the point is that will come out with the dogs. It'll come out I have to be careful because, like, if I'm milking the goat and the goat sometimes is temperamental and she doesn't want to hold still, well, my first urge is just to smack her. But so instead, what I do is I take her food away because she wants to eat the whole time. So I say, okay, this is the deal. You want this nice food because she's got her favorite food. You get to eat and I get to milk you.
Yes.
But I have to watch because my urge is just whack that thing and force it to hold still. And so this is real spiritual development.
Yes.
This is real shadow work live, right? And that's what people are avoiding.
Yeah, completely. And there, instead of being punishing, you're actually honing in on the animal's language and you're putting forth a consequence of action to show, hey, this is what needs to happen here. But but also, why is it? Like tuning in and tapping into what is going on with that animal that they may be having an unsettled response, right? Because so much of that is that they're feeding off of our energy, right? And so I love how you shift that in that moment of being aware of what your quick response is, right? And it's the same as mine. Yeah. I had the same father as you. I mean, that's why dogs and animals have been my most impeccable teachers, is they show me.
Hi, everybody. Have you ever wondered why your blood is red? It's because it's full of oxygen and life force. It's what keeps you going. But what if I could tell you about something else that's red that will add more life force and keep you going? And if you start with a red juice before you have coffee or tea and wait a few minutes, you might find that you either don't need the coffee or the tea or you need less of it. But this time, instead of getting coffee and tea, you got a lot of nutrition and a lot of great stuff for stress management and detoxification. And it's so important. I got Drew Cannoli. It took me 2 years to get him to come hang out with me and talk about this. I said, Drew, tell me more about your red juice. And he is right here to tell us what is on with your red juice. My kids love it. Everybody I know loves it.
Well, I love that we have it for kids because when I was a kid, there was this big red dude that would burst through a brick wall and he was like, oh yeah. And he would feed me a glass of 50 grams of sugar, giving most people diabetes, ADHD, addiction,
obesity,
all the things, right? So when we created Red, it was, what's the alternative? If we could create something that could create lasting stamina, lasting energy, and then we started to look at our ancient ancestors. We talk about the Vikings, the people that were rowing across the oceans for days to go to war. What were they taking? Well, they were taking rhodiola. Rhodiola is in our red juice. And then we were like, okay, so out of all the mushrooms, what's one of the best medicinal mushrooms that can give us long-lasting energy? We found cordyceps. Cordyceps are absolutely amazing. Not just any cordyceps or rhodiola, glyphosate residue-free and organic. And how can we make it taste better than how do we make it taste better than that without the sugar? We added a little monk fruit.
Monk fruit's amazing.
Yep, and we found the best berries on the planet. Berries in high amounts, which we have in the red juice, actually help increase stem cell creation in your body. What's better than that for our little ones and for us? And so many people are just lethargic. They're lacking energy. What could we do for that? Red juice in the afternoon, 2 p.m. rolls around, instead of a nap, instead of the coffee, drink the red juice. You're going to feel so much better.
Well, if you need the nap, take the nap if you can, but then take the red juice to kick you back into gear.
Exactly. I love naps, and I love coffee.
I do too, but I love to make sure I got the nutrition in me first. The other thing is berries are a natural stimulant to the adrenal glands. So if people would do a little red juice before they do coffee and tea, they would pick themselves up naturally, except this time they're bringing in nutrition. And unfortunately, coffee blocks almost every vitamin and mineral you can put in your mouth. So hey, there you have it, right from the man himself.
To try Organifi's red juice and get 20% off your order, go to Organifi.com/Chek20 and use the promo code Chek20 at checkout. That's Organifi.com/CHEK20 and the promo code is CHEK20 for a 20% discount.
There's 2 kinds of pellets that Angie and Penny have. One is straight alfalfa, and the other one's a mix of something. It looks slightly different. And the girls usually put 1 scoop of each in, but I noticed as I was milking the goat, she's not eating the alfalfa. She's going after the other stuff. And so I noticed that every time she starts getting unruly, it's when she runs out of her favorite stuff.
Ah.
And so I'm like, oh, okay, so there's a connection here. She doesn't want me to milk her if she can't get what she wants. And so I thought, okay, so what I did is I started getting up and getting another scoop of the other stuff and saying, well, it's easier just to let her have the good stuff that she likes than it is to deal with this goat kicking and jumping all over the place and practically trying to kill herself to get off the milking stand.
Yeah.
If we are caught in our unconscious programming, then we're not observing. And so I've always tried to observe what's going on so that I can say, okay, I have to identify what the real challenge is so I can come up with a real solution. Otherwise, the only option is to force the goat into what I want it to do or to force the dog into what I want it to do. And, like I noticed the first time you came here and the dogs ran at you, you turned a little sideways and you didn't look directly at them. And I thought, well, that's an interesting way to, relate to the dog. And I didn't know why you did that. So, we talked about that in the first podcast. But you see, I picked up on that immediately, and you're the only person I've ever seen do that. And the dogs behave differently for you than they did other people. But you see, the point that I'm making here is that you've got to observe the environment you're in, and you've got to observe your internal environment at the same time. Because if your internal environment is such that it stops you from seeing what's actually happening around you and looking for a solution, then you keep using, it's like Einstein said, you can't solve a problem with the same thinking that created it. You have to be able to climb out of the box of your own habitual behaviors, or you keep doing the same shit, but the world keeps changing around you, which means it's like using the same tool for the wrong job. Can't use a crescent wrench for everything. It won't work.
Right.
And so if you don't learn to create new tools as the environment changes, then you end up with wounded dogs and wounded animals and wounded children and wounded friends. And you turn on your television, that's where we're at.
Completely. I speak of this all the time in my work, especially when I'm initially starting to connect with clients, is to really embody what it means to be the conscious observer.
Mm-hmm.
And it rarely has to do with the dog's behavior, to even be consciously observing the dog's behavior, because it is a manifestation of what is within our internal landscape. And we're very unaware, disconnected, distracted from what it is that is going on inside of us and the reverberation of that, right? How does that transcend into all relations? And what's so fascinating is that when my clients get to peek inside and explore what's going on in a very deep way.
With themselves or with the dogs or both?
Yeah, with themselves, automatically, without having to train, without having to fix, without having to correct anything, it organically heals.
You're saying the dog relationship?
Yes. But it doesn't stop there, because what ends up happening is clients will call back and give me feedback and say, well, I've healed my relationship with my mother. We're starting to really be very cohesive and peaceful with one another. I just got a raise at work. Or this house that I've been eyeing, that I've been saving up for, that I thought was totally out of the realm of me being able to live there, all of a sudden came on the market, and now I have the funds to be able to purchase. All of these things coming into universal alignment. Really, the reason that our lives are not that way is not because of the external environment, but because of the environment within.
Well, you always are seeing the world through your own internal perception.
Exactly.
That's why there's the saying, perception is reality. And so if you're healing aspects of yourself, the analogy I use, you know how motocross racers have tear-off lenses?
Yes.
Well, if you got a lens that says daddy problems, and then another one that says mommy problems, and then school teacher problems, and then brother and sister problems, and sex problems, and drug problems. And so what happens is every one of those is actually like a lens you're looking through at the world. So I try to work with people at the very beginning with the mommy and daddy issues, because if you heal those, it causes a domino effect.
Yeah.
Because it releases the trauma, because they're almost always, how you perceive your father archetypally is how you perceive males in general.
Mm-hmm.
How you perceive your mother is how you perceive females in general.
Right.
So a lot of my clients and patients have illnesses because they're under so much stress because of their spousal challenges. But I find if I address the mommy daddy issues, then their whole inner self changes and they realize, wow, I'm treating my wife the way my father treated my mother. And I would never have realized that had you taken me through these exercises to see it. And when they see it from their own perspective without anyone forcing it on them as a diagnosis or a judgment, just saying, okay, here's what I want you to observe. And now I have a whole series of steps I go through because you have to do this methodically or it doesn't work properly. But the point being is when you tear off the mommy-daddy lens, all of a sudden your worldview changes. And not only that, you see how many people have serious mommy-daddy issues going on.
Well, and it also circles back to the wounded masculine and feminine.
Yes. Yeah.
Right? And how that exists. The imbalance exists in both, right?
Yeah.
And so that when we get to explore those avenues, exactly, it really paves the way for full clarity, full transformation. How many people are just go through life not even being presented with this idea that that's what's going on under the surface, right?
Yeah, and it brings up an important correlation because, one of the shocking realizations I had in a podcast I was doing with Mark Goffney is I was talking about the World Economic Forum and their whole ideology and whatever. And Mark said to me, well, do you realize who Klaus Schwab's hero and Yuval Noah Harari's hero is and who is their lead influence? I said, no. He said, Adler. And I went, oh my God, Adler. Behavioral psychology, which is basically, using bait and Pavlovian psychology to manipulate people into behaving the way they would do a lab animal. And look at their whole gestalt. You will own nothing and be happy. You'll be in our cage. You'll be in a digital prison. We'll be your masters, ...
Oh, are we seeing a similarity here?
Yes. So you see the whole thing is that what you're really talking about, and I've heard you mention it several times that it bothers you is that a lot of the dog trainers out there are using this sort of right by might, screw the relationship with the dog. It's just tell the dog what to do and make it do it. Sit when I tell you to or else, and so that's Adlerian psychology writ large. And so it's very interesting because you can see how that has gotten us in trouble at the highest social order. And it's exactly how the government behaves. There's another thought that came to my mind, which I think you'll find interesting. Carl Jung said something quite profound. He said, all children are tasked with the unfinished business of their parents' lives. And I thought, well, this is perfect for Sasha because all dogs are tasked with the unfinished business of their owners' lives.
And that circles back to Angie's session with the woman and her cats. And it's like, we can't even wrap our minds around what is transmitted and infused into all relations, our children, our animals, by way of our programming.
Yeah.
And our wounding and how that manifests in our self, in our bodies, in our minds, in our hearts, in our spirits. And then we end up just unconsciously injecting that into the ones that are closest to us.
I think another factor too is that, and Ibrahim Karim talks about this, the founder of biogeometry, he describes animals as living primarily out of their right brain, which is the brain of wholeness. So they're not separate from the environment. They're not separate from anything.
Yes.
And they're living in the now. They don't think ahead or, they're not planning and conniving. They're in the moment. And so because animals and dogs are inherently living from this right brain perspective of the now and the wholeness of everything, they're not missing what's going on in us. In other words, surely you've had the experience of seeing someone on the street or will say, hey, how you doing? And they say, oh, everything's fine, but their body language is everything's not fine. And they're just, sugarcoating it. But on the inside, we know this person's not telling me the truth. There's obviously something really going on in their life, but sometimes we just don't have the time to get into a drama. So we just roll with it. But on the inside, we're going, something's happening here.
Unless you're me and I always call people out.
Well, maybe, yeah.
Like, tell me what's really going on, because
When
what you're putting out here is telling me something different.
When I'm working with patients that are paying me to do that, I
Of
do
course.
that. If it's a friend, I'll say, really?
Mm-hmm.
You sure? Because behind that face of yours, there's another story. You want to share it? But the point I'm making is that, see, in shamanism, there's this concept, actually, which is I learned from studying the work of Arnold Mindell, and he talks about double messaging. So when someone tells you they're fine, but you know they're not, that's a double message.
Yes.
And double messages always create chaos in a relationship. So a lot of people that own dogs are double messaging their dogs. Like, they might be saying, I love you, but they're hitting them. Or they might be saying, this is good for you, but they're giving them processed crap, and the dog knows it's making itself sick because it has nothing else to eat.
But they don't have a choice.
But so the double message from,
Yes.
because they're seeing all the facial messaging and all the posturing that the owner of the dog's not even aware that they're broadcasting.
And like you said, the dog is hardwired. It's part of their intrinsic nature is that they're so pure in the generous present moment that they can't, they're processing all of this and still remain, I mean, for the most part, intact.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. But as we said, they do get sick, and they do carry a lot of karma, wounding, trauma, pain. I mean, I've been around people's dogs that I could tell were really concerned for their owners.
Yeah.
I can feel it in them. It's as though they know that the owner's maybe sick or got a disease, and even when the person may not know it, but they're very sensitive. It's kind of like Angie, her dog, Maggie.
Her pug?
Yeah. Was a service dog. And she used to go to hospitals with Maggie, and Maggie always would walk to the bed of the person that was about to die and knew exactly every time who was about to die, like cats can do too. And so the dogs have, for lack of a better term, a radar that most human beings haven't developed, because they're able to actually see through the surface of things. And I think that's quite important for anybody that has pets or animals in general to be aware of.
Attuned to.
Are you ready to switch careers to one where you can help others to look great, feel great, and create their dreams? Or maybe you're already a health and fitness professional and are called to elevate your skills and knowledge and learn to address the whole person with genuine, tried and tested holistic approaches? If so, then now is the time to apply for the Chek Academy, and enrollment is open for the fall intake. The Chek Academy offers you everything you need to master a holistic approach to helping people, practical skill development, personal coaching principles, business building tools, and much more. Developed by Paul Chek himself, shaped into an easy-to-follow program of study by the Chek Institute CEO, Gavin Jennings, using the strategies he created to build a highly successful multidisciplinary clinic, and taught by experts in the industry, the Chek Academy is your next step to a fulfilling career. If you're switching to a new career path, you can learn the basics effectively and efficiently and begin making an income doing what you love to do. As your clientele builds and you progress in the Chek Academy, you can cut back on your old job and more fully engage a new rewarding career in holistic health. For those already working as exercise or healthcare professionals, then this is your path to achieve mastery of your craft and become the best in your field. Ready to take the next step and want to see what the Chek Academy can offer you? The open house allows you a sneak peek into the learning system and courses in the Chek Academy. But this opportunity is only open for a limited time, and there are only 100 spaces for this fall intake. So head on over to chek.group/ChekL4D and see what the Chek Academy can offer you. That's chek.group/CHEKL4D. Don't waste another year wondering if you should join. Check it out now and take the next step in your professional development.
How do you suggest people who are going through things like divorces, losses of jobs, or maybe are depressed or suffering from anxiety, how do you suggest people that have these issues consciously manage themselves in relationship with their animals so that the dog or the pet doesn't suffer unnecessarily from that. Because if they're able to read us and they understand things like we're talking about, how does somebody navigate the relationship with their animal such that it doesn't damage the relationship or overstress the animal? It seems because it's a real living relationship, but it's not normal for someone to say to their dog, I've just been diagnosed with cancer, and pour their heart out to the dog, because dogs don't speak English or the language, but they speak intuition, they speak feeling, they speak instinct. But do you see what I'm asking?
I so see.
I don't think anyone's ever taught anyone about how to do that. I've never seen anything in my life written.
Well, let's explore
about what you do, because that's pretty important.
And thank you for just saying that dogs don't speak English.
Well, they don't.
Everybody, did you
They
hear
do
that?
amaze me, though. They do amaze me, because if you say the word walk, our dogs will get up immediately.
It's the Pavlovian response. It's the conditioning. It's because they're creatures of association.
Yeah.
Right? Which we can dig into. But I want to focus on, this is a very important topic to discuss. And it really comes down to emotional maturity, staying in one's lane, and dealing with our own processes, right? And not having an expectation that somebody or something is going to solve our problems, but that we have to be the one that heals ourselves. Right. And that, just like, with you, Paul, if I came today and just absolutely unloaded onto you about whatever problems I have, whatever emotional, things I've got going on.
Oh, it would change the nature of the mix of the smoke.
Yes, it would. Yes, it would. And also, it's that I wouldn't, unless we were in a setting, right, where we were working together, where that was an understanding, right, from human to human, that was what we were here to, that was the work that we were here to do together.
Yeah.
But otherwise, just me unconsciously dumping and projecting what is wounded inside of me is not fair to you. Right. And so it does come from a level of accountability, self-responsibility, and not relying on something outside of us, especially our dogs, because they don't have a choice. Paul, you can say to me, Sasha, this conversation is not appropriate at this time. Let's set aside another time to really hone in on that. But right now, you can communicate that in a way that, in a language that I speak, right? But a dog becomes the victim of the human's projection.
Yeah. So maybe I'm trying to get you to address something. Not that this is ever going to happen. I highly doubt this could ever happen. But let's just say that I went for a routine medical checkup, and out of the blue, the doctor said, you have stage 4 cancer. You better get your shit together and get ready to make sure you got a will and get ready to go, because, the chances of surviving from this cancer are almost none. And maybe he said, I got 6 months to live. Now, I'm going to come home in a state of shock, probably in a state of denial initially. And that inner reality could very much make me scared. It could make me angry. It could make me short-tempered. And it could show up in my relationship with our 2 dogs in ways that could confuse them. I could be more abusive to them. I could be any number of things, right?
Yeah.
So what I'm asking you is, if you have a situation like a divorce or a diagnosis like that, or something that you're really challenged to work through or are having a hard time working through, how would you suggest, what would you do if that was you and you came home to your 2 dogs knowing what you know and not wanting them to embody that stress and end up getting the same diagnosis 6 months later?
Yes, right. So I think the important thing first to note is that we need to feel our feelings, and we need to go through that process. And in the sake of not exposing our dogs to these, traumatic situations and our feelings around them, we need to be able to go through that. And it's not that I'm saying that the dog needs to be, that you need to like shut down your feelings in order to protect your dog.
Well, they're going to know it anyhow. That's the whole thing
exactly,
I'm concerned about.
That's precise. So with them already being in the know of what is occurring, and I will tell you 100% that the dog already knew what was going on before you or any of the doctors, right?
Yeah.
So the important thing is to have your experience, but not engage with your dog directly and involve them in the experience.
You mean don't make your dog your doctor or your psychologist?
Exactly.
So how do you do that,
Right.
though? Like, how do you, because you're changing.
Right.
Like you're going through a real stressful time. You may really need that dog for emotional support. Sasha, I've had patients who had dogs that they really loved, and I can remember one really profound case, but I've had multiple of them over the years. I remember I've been doing this for 40 years, so I've seen a lot. But I remember a guy came to me. He originally came to me for health problems, but while I was working with him, his dog died. And his dog was a German Shepherd. It was a service dog. It was kind of like a police dog type, and I think he had a military background. And he told me, he sat in my office and cried and cried and cried. And he told me, he said, Paul, I've had a lot of friends and family members die, but I've never felt the kind of pain, grief, and loss I have with my dog dying. And I ended up having to spend most of my time helping him through this relationship. And fortunately, I have the ability to connect to any soul. So I actually became a medium for him to talk to his dog. And I connected to the dog's soul and asked the dog to communicate to me. And then I would translate it to him. And that was probably the most powerful thing, because he could find out that the dog was okay and, and get past his sort of own unconscious illusions about the separation.
Yes.
And having done this many times, one of the things I find is when dogs die, to the degree the owner is having a hard time letting go, they hang around the owner. Angie's dog, Maggie, it was probably almost 2 years before Maggie wasn't constantly around Angie. And I think Angie was too emotional at the time to really see what she could normally see. Like if it was me and it was my dog, she would have known it instantly. But I think because it was so hard on her, she was having to find a way to let go. But that type of wound for a person can be so profound and significant. And I think because we tend not to have baggage with our animals like we do with humans.
Right.
Like, for example, my stepfather could die any day now. But because of the pain that I lived through, I know it's not going to affect me like it would if Penny was to die or Angie was to die or one of my own children was to die. Because something started dying in me the day he started beating on me, and so I don't really have that connection. So anyhow, what I'm trying to point out is that there's this very deep connection between humans and dogs and humans, as you know. And so I know that people need their dog support because a lot of people do a lot better relating to dogs than they do humans, especially wounded people.
Yeah.
People that have gone through the kind of childhoods you and I have often find animals a lot safer to be around and would much rather be with animals than human beings. So the connection between them is not one in which they can just put their feelings aside or put in another lane. It's a very real relationship. So I think what I'm wanting to hear you say is, what do you do if you have that real relationship with an animal, but you need the animal's help?
Right.
But you don't want to turn the animal into your psychologist. So how do you navigate? That's a tricky one.
It's tricky, and it's also, it can be very simplistic. So it ultimately comes down to balance, right? So there's a lot of dogs that serve a role as service animals.
Yes.
And that is their job, whether they're seeing eye dogs, whether they're, alerting their companion, the human that they're in charge of protecting, that they're about to have a seizure, emotional support animals, you name it. Where the issue comes in is that it's out of balance. So the dog is performing a service to humans, but we are not taking the time or the energy to support the dog's emotional needs. So it's very out of balance.
Well, how does one learn to do that?
Well, under learning about the dog, their intrinsic nature, understanding their language.
Don't you have a course on that?
Yeah.
That what your first course is about?
Yes. And it's really, that's woven, that is what all of my work and all of my offerings and teachings are about. And it is about establishing and fulfilling the alpha leadership role, right? That's the ultimate support and expression of love that we can give to our dogs, right? Not giving them manicures and pedicures and memory foam dog beds and spa, all of the stuff that we as humans think dogs value. Dogs have no value for that. They have a true necessity. They have a need and a value for knowing exactly where they fit in, where their placement is, where they belong, and trusting in their humans as the ones to really manage and take care of life in a world that they don't understand. And I also want to say there that for me, and I guess just to paint this clear picture for our listeners that are wondering, how do we create a safe space where we're not, where we're basking in the love and the support that our dogs naturally give to us just by them being there? They don't even have to do anything. Just their presence is so healing. So if I'm having a day where I'm a little bit off, or if I'm, we all have our days where we're not on our A game. If I'm feeling overwhelmed, stressed, I make the conscious choice and distinction to actually create a separation from my dogs. So that would look like me not directly engaging with them throughout the day so that I can kind of stay in my lane and be an autonomous, independent being. It doesn't mean that I'm not experiencing their healing energy, because I am, but it creates a protective barrier so they don't have to be the victims or be subjected to whatever is going on with me in that particular moment on that day.
If you have listened to even one episode of Paul's podcast before, then you will know that he is passionate, and some would say even fanatical, about the quality of the food he eats and where it is sourced from. That is why the Chek household only eats pasture-raised meat, wild-caught fish, and organic produce. And that is why we subscribe to Wild Pastures meat delivery service. Each month, Wild Pastures delivers a box of meat that has been raised by family farmers in the USA using regenerative farming practices. 100% grass-fed and finished beef, pasture-raised chicken, and pasture-raised pork, as well as wild-caught seafood. You can customize the selection in your box, add on extra when you know you will be feeding more people, or change your options each and every month. You might be thinking that this will be too expensive for you, but Wild Pasture's mission is to offer the highest quality meat at the lowest prices because they want to transform the meat industry. And that means that more people need to be able to choose meat that is raised right. Their pasture-raised animals are part of a natural ecosystem. Their farmers use rotational grazing, practices that mimic nature, and so do not need to use synthetic fertilizers, pesticides, herbicides, hormones, or antibiotics. This beautiful process doesn't require the external resources, such as massive amounts of GMO grain, required with environmentally depleting conventional methods. And best of all, the meat and fish taste amazing. And for Paul's listeners, Wild Pastures are offering you 20% off your subscription for life, $15 off your first order, and free shipping. Seriously, you can't find a better deal for top quality pasture-raised meat. Go to wildpastures.com/Paul Chek. You don't need a promo code. Just visit wildpastures.com/Paul Chek and start choosing the goodies you will have delivered to you in your first box.
Okay, so I'm going to give you an analogy because I think I can help people understand what you're saying better. You can correct me if I'm wrong. I can't come home from work and announce at the dinner table we're running low on money, we might not be able to pay the mortgage this month, and we could be losing our house.
Exactly.
It'd scare the living shit out of the kids.
Yep.
And they would be like, what does that mean? Am I
Right.
gonna lose my, it send them into a tizzy.
That's not their responsibility.
Yeah.
They're not cut out to deal with that pressure.
Mm-hmm. So you're saying that you, in the scenario you gave, would go about your business, but you wouldn't go to the dog and say, well, I'm really pissed off with the fucking world today.
Or just, crying on top of them, or, making really like involving them in your experience. Because also, it brings about a bigger, more kind of higher concept of we as humans have a choice, right? And my dogs, when I'm getting in a funk, or if I'm having a moment or a day, I step into the conscious observer role, into the present moment. I am future tripping, getting worried about what's going to happen in the future, shoulda, woulda, coulda, fear of it, or, oh my gosh, what happened in the past. Neither one exists. All that exists is what is happening in the very present moment. And my dogs hold the presence. They create the space for me to step into that, right? It's not even just a realization, it's an embodiment. And as soon as I tap into that, it's like all of the stress and the nervous and the anxious energy just dissolves, and I'm left regulated, I'm left calm, I'm left hopeful and peaceful, and everything softens. And I get to watch how my dogs respond to me as a result, and it can happen just like that.
Okay, so if I'm understanding you correctly, what I'm hearing you say is that in the situation you've described, you're having a very stressful day. You could be futurizing, pasteurizing, but you're spun out. What I hear you saying is that if you go spend a few minutes with your dogs and really be present with them, because they're fully capable of being present with you, that actually helps you detach from your story and regain your footing, because they're creating a reconnection to the reality of the present moment, which is really all there is. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
That's precisely it.
So you're not going to them to vent, but you're going to them just to throw a ball, pet.
Not even to engage directly, just to be.
So just sit and hang out with them.
Yeah. It's almost like an awake meditation, eyes open, eyes closed, but don't feel that you have to be doing.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about doing. It's your way of being, which of course segues into a whole other topic of a program need to keep the dog active, and how that's not necessarily, and I would say is not the healthy, balanced way to be, or just like, with you, right? Like, I know you're constant going, but also, even what you expressed to me earlier was like having this time where you get to just calm and just be, and not be doing this and running here and running there. And it's so important for your longevity and vitality to come back to this just being, so that you can do whatever it is that you need to do.
That's why I paint. That's why I stack rocks.
Right.
That's why I lift weights. Interestingly, those things for me are things I do far better without a mind. Like I don't have to think about lifting weights. I've done it since I was 12. So I lift weights like people breathe, Stacking rocks is not about calculating and thinking and planning. It's just about being present with the moment. Yeah. If you're not present in the moment, you'll be present forever in the moment, because you'll be dead or broken. And painting is when I just let my soul take over. I just become a medium for my soul. And I don't want to think about anything. I just want to be thought or created. So if we transfer that to be with the dog, is to not think, it's just to be with the dog.
Yeah. Or and even better yet, like let's incorporate your practice in when you feel those moments, instead of going to your dog, looking to them to pacify you or lick your wounds, right? How about paint? How about meditate? How about stack rocks? How about, all the different ways that we can regulate ourselves and take care of ourselves without having to involve the dog in a forced way in terms of our healing process. Just allow them to be healing by their very nature.
Yeah, so now you could mix the two, because whenever I go out to stack rocks, the dogs know immediately. They instantly, no matter what, they're wanting to go with me. And as soon as I open the gate, because it's inside of the Olympic volleyball court, so the kids can't get to it.
Right.
Because it's too dangerous for the kids. But they love to go hunt the lizards. So once I go in, their cue is it's lizard hunting time, but they love to go out with me. So if I was having a really stressful day, instead of going and vomiting on the dogs, or, projecting and getting irritated and then making them the target, I could go lift some rocks to be brought into the now and shake it off.
Yeah.
And just being with them out there and watching them do their thing, and
yes,
having that relationship with them could work well for both of us. Would that be safe?
Yes, absolutely. And you see how you're in that space, you're sharing togetherness, but you also are autonomous.
Yeah. Very
Right?
much so, yeah.
Yeah.
Except I do have to watch them carefully, because Samson, for example, or Teddy will be so aggressive at getting a ground squirrel that they'll start trying to dig to get it underneath big rock stacks, and the base stone can shift and the rocks can come down on top of them. So I'm always got to watch them really carefully, because they don't realize what physics is.
Right. Until it's too late.
Yeah. Well, anyhow, this is very interesting. I think probably one of the big challenges for you, and I'm sure it is a challenge for you, it must be as hard for you to look at the way dogs are raised and managed and trained as it is for me to see people getting caught in religious silliness all the time and have to walk around in the world full of people just indoctrinated and lost and torturing themselves or eating garbage and not realizing that it's garbage and thinking it's good food. And then you have to watch all this crazy, confused dog owner behavior and see all these different organizations teaching people stuff that's really not optimal for neither the animal or the human. But I guess that's why we do what we do, right?
Yes.
To try to help people know there's better ways. So what I'll do right now is say, hey, I hope you guys have enjoyed the podcast so far. So those of you that want to join the Spirit Gym podcast membership, go to paulchek.com and you can become a Spirit Gym podcast member and get the rest of the story, the extended play. And Sasha and I are only on question number 3. So there's more to come. And Sasha, thank you for the first half. I think we covered a lot of very interesting information, very important. I think when I talk to you about dogs, it's like I am getting a complete reframing of my orientation toward the relationship with the dog. It's kind of like when my students say to me after doing a workshop with me, wow, you've changed the whole way I see my life. And I know they mean that in a positive way. You make me a lot more sensitive to the reality that my dogs live in, so that I, instead of looking at a dog and seeing what I project onto it from my experience of, being raised with dogs and being on a farm, and basically that they're tools that you use. This is how I was raised. The dog's a tool. You do what you want with it. You can hunt with it. You can kick it. You can love it, whatever. They're just tools. That's the typical farmer's approach to a dog, a lot of them. But now I look at the dogs with your influence on me as a living being that has a reality that's very uniquely its own, that serves not only a role in companionship with me, but a role that's very important as an integrated aspect of the whole of nature all around me. And knowing that a lot of them are actually completely out of their natural environment. It's not a normal thing for a dog to live in an apartment building and get 20 minutes to go piss on the park lawn and be jerked by the neck everywhere. That to me is like being a prisoner. So it must be very stressful for the dogs. But anyhow, you understand what I'm saying? It's like I'm getting to see dogs it's almost like I'm getting to experience the spirit of the dog inside of me, like what it must be like to be a dog, so that now that when I relate to my dogs, I can sort of understand them a lot better and try to relate to them with that understanding in the forefront instead of a bunch of preconceived notions. And I hope that those of you listening are getting that. But if you read Sasha's Peaceful Dog Mastery book, it's super good. I read through the table of contents, I read the introduction, and I looked through to see what parts of it I thought were, particularly important for other people to read, which is the whole thing. And I knew that I would have this chance to be with you to go through this. And so everyone, you're getting a bit of a sample of what she's teaching in her book and in her course now. So I'll close this first segment by saying thank you to my sponsors for your love, your support, and your ethical treatment of the environment, and your great support of organic, biodynamic, free-range, regenerative farmers, all the things that make us happy to spend money with you, because our money is supporting the whole world and the people that should be supported, which is farmers. And it's exciting to know that you get to eat real food and supplements that work when you buy from our sponsors. And anything you buy from them gives us a little commission to support the podcast. So thank you. We're all in a win-win relationship. I always say love is a boomerang. What you give out comes back. And again, if you want to join the podcast, Spirit Gym podcast membership, go to paulchek.com or look in the show notes, and you can do that. And Sasha and I will be back with some more interesting explorations, and I'm sure I'm going to learn more, and so will you. Lots of love. Say thank you for the first segment, Sasha, and we will continue.
Thank you, Paul. Lots of love.
All right. Aho, everybody. See you soon.
Aho.
Come to the other side. We'll meet you there for the rest of the story.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
I hope you enjoyed this conversation between Paul and Sasha Armstrong. If you found value in today's show, there's more great content waiting for you in our special, brand new Spirit Gym podcast membership. When you subscribe, you'll get access to exclusive extended episodes of Spirit Gym with Paul Chek, members-only Q&A opportunities with Paul, access to the podcast members forum within the Spirit Gym community where you can interact with other passionate listeners, and the opportunity to purchase exclusive Spirit Gym merchandise. Your support helps keep the show running and allows us to bring you even better content. So if you're ready to dive deeper and unlock all these amazing extras, head over to paulchek.com/podcast and become a Spirit Gym podcast member today. You can get Sasha's latest book, Peaceful Dog Mastery, on Amazon.com and find her online on Instagram and TikTok at Canine State of Mind. Visit her website, www.caninestateofmind.com, to learn more about her services and her self-paced course, the Embodied Alpha Masterclass. Sasha is offering Paul's listeners a special discount off the Embodied Alpha Masterclass, which is highly recommended for anyone with canine companions. Visit tiny.cc/dog shaman and enter the promo code PaulChek30. That's tiny.cc/dog shaman and use the promo code PaulChek30. For more of the resources mentioned in this episode, please visit the show notes page at paulchek.com/podcast. You can also find details of the special offers from our premier sponsors, Bioptimizers, Paleo Valley, Wild Pastures, and Organifi, as well as links to Paul's social media, his YouTube channels, and his blog. And finally, if you enjoyed today's episode, please consider leaving us a 5-star rating and a warm review on the podcast platform of your choice. This podcast is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, Audible, and YouTube.